Professor Darian adjusted his visual display one more time before the students arrived. Today would be special. Today he would deliver his most requested lecture, the one that always filled every seat in the auditorium. The subject matter frightened most species, but fear had a way of drawing crowds. Knowledge of ancient predators made the modern galaxy feel safer by comparison. The lecture hall at Haven 7 was designed to hold 200 students comfortably. Each seat adjusted automatically to fit different body types, from the small Minorans who barely reached 3 feet tall to the towering Velcrans like himself, who stood nearly 8 feet. The walls displayed a soft blue glow, calming for most species. Outside the tall windows, 3 moons hung in the purple sky of this peaceful academic world. Students began filing in 30 minutes before start time. They always came early for this lecture. Professor Darian watched them settle into their seats, chattering in dozens of languages that the translator implants converted into understandable speech. Most of his students came from herbivore or omnivore species. True predators were rare in the Galactic Council. Predatory species tended toward aggression, territorial disputes, and violent solutions. The peaceful species had inherited the stars simply by outlasting the dangerous ones. David Wright entered the auditorium and immediately headed for the back row. He had learned during his first week at the academy that humans made other species uncomfortable, though no one would explain exactly why. Sitting in the back meant fewer stares, fewer nervous glances. He settled into a seat that adjusted to his frame, somewhat awkwardly since human proportions fell outside the normal range for most species. His friend Petra spotted him and climbed the steps to join him. She was Minoran, covered in soft gray fur with large eyes that evolution had designed for spotting predators. Those eyes could see in almost complete darkness and detected the slightest movement. Right now they looked worried. "Are you sure you want to stay for this lecture?" Petra asked quietly. Her translator converted her high-pitched voice into something his human ears could process comfortably. Professor Darian's apex predator lecture can be quite disturbing for some species. David smiled, trying to look reassuring. Humans smiled to show friendliness, though he had learned that many species found the display of teeth threatening. "I'll be fine. I'm interested in xenobiology. That's why I'm here." Petra's ears flattened slightly against her head, a sign of anxiety. "Yes, but the species he discusses are truly frightening. Pack hunters with venom, ambush predators with adaptive camouflage, hive-mind carnivores that coordinate perfectly. Some students have nightmares after this lecture." "I appreciate the warning," David said, "but I've seen nature documentaries from Earth. We had plenty of apex predators on my planet too." The way Petra shifted in her seat suggested she wanted to say something more, but the lights dimmed. Professor Darian stepped up to the presentation platform. The visual display behind him activated, showing the title in glowing letters that the translator implants converted for each student. "Apex Predators, a Comparative Study. Welcome," Professor Darian began. His voice carried authority earned from 40 years of teaching. "Today we will examine the most dangerous predator species ever documented in the known galaxy. I must warn sensitive students that some content may cause distress." The exit doors remain unlocked. No one left. 200 students sat in absolute silence. Let us begin with the Ravix pack hunters of the Outer Rim. The display showed a creature that looked like a cross between a reptile and a wolf, covered in dark scales with powerful legs. The Ravix hunt in coordinated packs of 12 to 20 individuals. They communicate through chemical signals that allow silent coordination. A Ravix pack can take down prey 10 times their individual size through teamwork and persistence. Their intelligence rivals that of most sentient species, yet they never developed tool use. They are pure biological killing machines. David watched several students shift uncomfortably. The Ravix looked impressive, certainly, but not so different from Earth's wolves or velociraptors. Evolution created similar solutions across the galaxy. Next, the Torath Solo ambush predators. A new image appeared, showing a massive creature with 6 limbs and adaptive skin that shifted colors. The Torath can wait motionless for days, their metabolism slowing to near hibernation. When prey approaches, they strike with devastating speed. Their venom paralyzes within seconds while keeping the victim conscious. The Torath prefer their meals aware. More uncomfortable shifting from the audience, David noticed that the few Torath students in the class sat up straighter, seeming proud rather than disturbed. The Krell hive mind. Carnivores represent perhaps the most efficient killing system evolution has produced. The display showed insect-like creatures working in perfect unison. Individual Krell possess limited intelligence but connected through pheromone networks. A swarm operates as a single superintelligent organism. They can solve complex problems, set elaborate traps, and coordinate attacks across vast distances. A Krell swarm consumed an entire colony of settlers on Outpost 7 before military intervention. Professor Darien paused, letting the information settle. These species represent the pinnacle of predatory evolution. Speed, venom, camouflage, coordination, intelligence. Yet none of them are the deadliest predator species on record. The room somehow grew quieter. David could hear his own heartbeat in the silence. The deadliest predator species possessed a unique combination of traits. They were persistence hunters who could track prey for days without stopping. They had forward-facing eyes that provided exceptional depth perception. They were highly social, forming bonds strong enough that individuals would sacrifice themselves for the group. They had relatively weak bodies, no natural weapons, no venom, no armor. Yet they compensated through tool use and strategic thinking. They learned to throw projectiles with deadly accuracy. They discovered fire and used it as a weapon. They domesticated other predators to serve them. The display began showing images, primitive spears, cave paintings depicting organized hunts, fossilized bones with tool marks. This species emerged from a death world. Their planet's hazard classification exceeds anything we consider safely habitable. Multiple apex predators competed for resources. Mega earthquakes reshaped continents. Ice ages and heat waves cycled rapidly. Disease and parasites evolved as quickly as immune systems. Yet this species not only survived but thrived. They hunted the megafauna to extinction. They spread across every environment on their world. They developed advanced technology not for exploration or art, but to kill more efficiently. David's stomach began to tighten. Those cave paintings looked familiar. The tools resembled artifacts from human museums. Most remarkably, this species eventually turned their predatory instincts on each other. They developed weapons capable of destroying their entire planet. They created diseases specifically to kill their own kind. Archaeological evidence suggests they came close to total self-extinction multiple times throughout their history. Professor Darien's expression was grim. I am pleased to inform you that this species no longer exists. They are extinct, destroyed approximately 300 years ago in an event their own records called the fracturing. The species was known as humans from the planet Earth. The display showed a final image, a reconstructed human skull with forward-facing eye sockets. David stared at it, his heart racing. Around him, students murmured with relief. Some actually applauded. Thank the void they're gone, someone whispered nearby. Imagine if something that dangerous still existed. David sat frozen in his seat, understanding finally why other species looked at him with fear. Several students left after Professor Darien revealed the extinct predator species. They walked quickly toward the exits, their discomfort obvious despite the reassurance that humans no longer existed. David watched them go, still processing what he had just heard. The professor had described his species like monsters from ancient mythology, creatures too dangerous to exist in a civilized galaxy. Petra remained in her seat beside him, though her large eyes kept darting toward the exit as if reconsidering her decision to stay. Her small hands gripped the armrests tightly. Professor Darien waited for the departing students to leave before continuing. I understand this topic creates anxiety. However, studying extinct predator species helps us appreciate the peaceful galaxy we now enjoy. The humans serve as an important lesson about the ultimate fate of unchecked aggression. The display behind him shifted to show terrain that David immediately recognized as African savanna. His chest tightened further as the professor began explaining persistence hunting. Human hunting strategy relied on endurance rather than speed. They were slower than their prey, weaker with no natural weapons. Yet they possessed one overwhelming advantage. They never stopped. A human could track an antelope for 20 miles under the burning sun. The prey would run, rest, run again. Eventually, the prey would collapse from exhaustion while the human was still running. This is called persistence hunting, and humans were the only species to develop it to such an extreme degree. A student raised a tentacle from the middle rows. Professor, how is that possible? Most species cannot run continuously for more than a few minutes without rest. Excellent question. Humans evolved several adaptations for endurance. They lost most of their body fur. allowing efficient cooling through sweat glands across their entire skin surface. Their legs were specifically designed for distance running with spring-like tendons that stored and released energy. They could breathe independently of their stride, unlike most predators whose running motion restricts breathing. Most importantly, their brains could ignore pain and exhaustion signals that would stop other species. David thought about his morning runs around the academy grounds, usually 3 to 5 miles before breakfast. He had never considered it unusual. Running felt natural, almost meditative. Several times he had noticed security following him, though they always claimed to be on routine patrol. Their forward-facing eyes gave them exceptional depth perception and tracking ability. The professor continued. They could spot tiny details in the environment that revealed their prey's path. Broken twigs, displaced stones, disturbed grass. Their pattern recognition exceeded most computer systems. They could predict where their prey would go based on minimal evidence. The display showed reconstructed hunting scenes. David recognized the tactics from human history classes: tracking, endurance, coordination. The professor made it sound sinister, but humans had simply adapted to survive on a challenging planet. Tool use separated humans from all other predator species. They began with sharpened stones, then progressed to spears, bows, eventually firearms. They didn't wait for evolution to give them claws and fangs. They created artificial ones, constantly improving them. Archaeological sites show a clear progression from simple tools to complex weapons over thousands of years. A Torath student interrupted, his voice skeptical. Professor, with respect, tool use alone doesn't make them deadlier than species with natural weapons. The Ravix coordinate complex pack tactics without any tools. Professor Darien nodded, seeming to expect this challenge. True. But humans combine tool use with something even more dangerous: social cooperation on a massive scale. Ravix packs number 20 individuals at most. Human tribes could number in the hundreds, sharing knowledge across generations. They developed language more complex than any other known species. They recorded information in permanent forms: writing, pictures, eventually digital storage. Each generation built on the knowledge of the previous one. The display showed cave paintings, cuneiform tablets, ancient books, computer screens. Human history compressed into a single visual timeline. They didn't just hunt animals. They hunted other apex predators. Archaeological evidence shows humans deliberately targeting and eliminating rival predators in their territories. They hunted creatures that no sane prey species would approach. They developed weapons specifically designed to kill bears, big cats, even other humans. Competition drove them to become better killers. David felt heat rising in his face. The professor wasn't wrong exactly, but the framing made humans sound like mindless killing machines. Humans had also created art, music, literature, philosophy. They had built cities and societies. They had developed ethics and laws specifically to control their violent impulses. Most disturbing is their domestication of other predators. They took wolf pups and bred them into dogs, creatures loyal only to humans. These dogs would attack on command, defend human territory, even sacrifice themselves for human owners. Humans created living weapons from other species. Several students made sounds of disgust. Petra's ears were flat against her head now, her eyes wide. Their adaptability exceeded any species we've documented. Humans lived in frozen Arctic regions where temperatures killed most life. They lived in deserts where water was scarce. They lived in jungles filled with diseases and poisonous creatures. They even lived on small islands in the middle of vast oceans. They didn't adapt biologically to these environments. They simply engineered solutions: clothing, shelter, fire, preserved food. They bent every environment to their will. David thought about Earth's diversity, the cultures that had developed in different regions. The professor made it sound threatening, but it was also beautiful. Humans had created thousands of different societies. Each adapted to their local conditions while maintaining the ability to communicate and trade with distant peoples. Let me address the question you're all thinking, Professor Darien said, his expression grave. Why did the Galactic Council classify humans as the deadliest predator species when they lacked venom, claws, speed, or armor? The room was absolutely silent. Because humans were apex predators who preyed on other apex predators. Because they never stopped improving their killing methods. Because they could survive in environments that would kill our most resilient species. Because they formed social groups large enough to overwhelm any individual predator. Because they passed down knowledge that made each generation more dangerous than the last. But most importantly, because they were willing to kill anything. The display showed human dietary information. David winced as the professor listed foods that humans consumed. Humans were omnivores with a diet range that defies logic. They ate plants, obviously, but also animals of every type. They consumed creatures that were poisonous to most species, developing immunity through gradual exposure. They ate fungus deliberately. They consumed fermented plant matter that produced toxic alcohol, drinking it for pleasure. They added chemical compounds like capsaicin, which evolved specifically to deter predators because they enjoyed the burning sensation. They drank coffee, which contains a pesticide called caffeine, as a daily stimulant. A Minoran student raised her hand, her voice shaking. "Professor, if they would eat poison for pleasure, what would they do to other sentient species?" Historical records suggest humans struggled with that question themselves. They developed complex ethical systems to regulate their behavior toward each other and other species. However, these systems broke down regularly. Human history is filled with wars, genocides, and acts of cruelty that shocked even the Galactic Council's military observers. David wanted to stand up, to defend his species, to explain that humans were more than their worst moments. But what could he say? The professor was citing historical facts. Humans had done terrible things throughout their history. They had also done beautiful things, but those weren't relevant to a lecture about predatory behavior. "The fracturing occurred 300 years ago," Professor Darien continued. "Council records from that period are fragmentary, but we know humans engaged in total warfare using nuclear weapons, biological agents, and other weapons banned by every civilized species." Their planet went silent. Deep space monitoring detected no signals, no space traffic, nothing. The assumption was total extinction. The display showed Earth as seen from orbit, though the continents looked wrong to David. This was Earth before the fracturing, before 3 centuries of rebuilding and healing. The galaxy became safer when humans disappeared. The Council could focus on exploration and peaceful cooperation, without wondering when an aggressive predator species might decide to expand into occupied territory. So today, students, remember this lesson. Remember what unchecked predation leads to. Remember that the deadliest species in the galaxy killed itself. Professor Darien stepped back from the display. Questions? Hands and appendages rose across the auditorium as students processed the disturbing lecture. David sat motionless in the back row while Petra trembled beside him. His mind was racing through everything he had just heard. The professor had described humans as extinct monsters, legendary predators that thankfully no longer existed. Yet David was sitting right here, breathing, very much alive. A student from the herbivore section spoke first. "Professor, is it true that humans hunted for sport? That they killed without needing food?" Professor Darien nodded slowly. "Archaeological evidence suggests recreational hunting was common among humans. They mounted the heads of their prey on walls as decorations. They kept records of their kills. Some humans competed to see who could kill the most or the largest specimens. They called these individuals hunters, and their societies often celebrated them." David gripped the armrest of his seat. Trophy hunting had been controversial even among humans, eventually banned in most regions after the fracturing. The professor made it sound like all humans were bloodthirsty trophy hunters. Another student, this one from the Torath predator species, asked a question that made David's blood run cold. "Professor, what could have killed something that dangerous? If humans were truly apex predators, what destroyed them?" Professor Darien's expression became even more somber. "That's the most disturbing part. Nothing killed them. They killed themselves. Their own aggression, turned inward, destroyed them. Human history is a pattern of escalating violence, tribal warfare, then national warfare, then global warfare. They developed weapons capable of destroying their entire planet, and during the fracturing they used them. The deadliest predator in the galaxy was also its own worst enemy." Murmurs of relief spread through the audience. Several students actually laughed, the nervous kind that comes after a scary story ends safely. "Thank goodness they're gone," someone said loudly enough for the entire room to hear. "Can you imagine if creatures like that were still out there? The Council would have to quarantine their entire system," another voice added. "Keep them away from civilized space. They'd probably try to hunt us," a third student suggested, and others agreed with worried sounds. David felt his face growing hot. They were talking about his species like extinct monsters, like demons from ancient mythology, but they were also talking about real historical facts. Humans had done terrible things. They had nearly destroyed themselves. The fracturing had killed billions, yet humans had also rebuilt. They had learned from their mistakes. They had spent 3 centuries healing their planet and themselves before reaching back out to the galaxy. Professor Darien raised his hands for silence. These concerns are precisely why we study extinct predator species. By understanding what made humans dangerous, we can recognize similar patterns in other species and intervene before another apex predator threatens galactic peace. The human extinction serves as a warning to... David stood up. The movement was sudden, unplanned, driven by 3 weeks of confusion and fear finally crystallizing into understanding. Every strange interaction at the academy suddenly made sense. The nervous glances, the security following him, the way other students avoided him in the corridors. They knew what humans were. They just thought humans were extinct. "Excuse me, sir," David said, his voice carrying in the quiet auditorium. "We're not extinct." The silence that followed was absolute. 200 students turned to look at the back row where David stood. Professor Darien froze mid-gesture, his expression confused. "I'm sorry," the professor said. "Did you have a question about the lecture material?" "No, sir. I'm making a correction." David's heart was pounding, but his voice remained steady. "Humans aren't extinct. We survived the fracturing. We've been rebuilding for 300 years. I'm human." For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then chaos erupted. Students scrambled from their seats. The Minorans evolved to flee from predators, bolted for the exits in a panicked rush. Several of the larger species backed away, putting distance between themselves and David. Petra made a small sound of terror and practically fell out of her seat trying to move away from him. "Security to Lecture Hall 7. Professor Darien's voice activated the emergency communication system. "Possible hostile situation." "I'm not hostile," David said loudly, keeping his hands visible and raised. "Please, everyone calm down. I'm not going to hurt anyone." But students were already flooding toward the exits. Those who couldn't reach the doors quickly enough pressed themselves against the walls as far from David as possible. A few of the predator species students stood their ground, eyeing him with a mixture of fear and fascination. Security arrived within minutes, armed with weapons David had never seen during his peaceful weeks at the academy. They were Velcrons like Professor Darien, tall and imposing, wearing armor and carrying devices that hummed with barely contained energy. "Step away from the other students," the lead security officer commanded. His weapon wasn't pointed directly at David, but the threat was clear. "I'm a registered student," David said, fighting to keep his voice calm. "My name is David Wright. I enrolled 3 weeks ago under the Cultural Exchange Program. Check your records." Professor Darien was frantically scrolling through his datapad, his face cycling through expressions of disbelief and horror. "There is a David Wright on my roster. Human listed as species. I thought it was an error in the system. I assumed you were some species I wasn't familiar with. You look so harmless." "Humans are excellent at looking harmless," a student called out from near the exit. The professor just explained their camouflage tactics. "That wasn't camouflage," David protested. "I just look like this. I can't help what I look like." Administrator Hollis burst into the lecture hall, followed by more security. She was Velcran, the dean of students, and David had met with her during his enrollment process. Her eyes widened when she saw the situation. David surrounded by armed security, students pressed against the walls or fleeing into the corridors, Professor Darien looking pale and shaken. "Stand down," Administrator Hollis ordered the security team. "I know this student. He's registered legally under the recent peace accords with the human government." "Peace accords?" Professor Darien's voice was faint. "With humans when?" "The agreements were finalized 6 months ago," Administrator Hollis said, though she kept a careful distance from David. "Several human students have enrolled at council institutions as part of cultural exchange programs. I thought the faculty had been briefed. The briefing material said new species from a recovered civilization," Professor Darien said. "They didn't specifically say human." "If I had known, you would have done what?" David asked, unable to keep the bitterness from his voice. "Refused to teach me? Demanded I be quarantined? Treated me like a dangerous animal?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Administrator Hollis took a deep breath. "Let me be clear. David Wright is a legally enrolled student under the protection of council law and interspecies treaty agreements. He has committed no violations of academy policy. He has been peaceful and cooperative since his arrival. The fact that his species has a difficult history doesn't change his rights as an individual. But Professor Darien just explained how dangerous humans are, a student said from the doorway. They're apex predators. They hunted everything to extinction. They destroyed their own planet 300 years ago, David said quietly. My ancestors did those things. I didn't. The humans alive today grew up in the aftermath, learning from those mistakes. We spent 3 centuries rebuilding our world and ourselves. We reached out to the council peacefully because we wanted connection, not conquest. A Torath student who had stayed in the room, the one who had asked about what could kill humans, stepped forward. His name was Riven, David remembered, one of the few predator species students. You said humans never stop, that they hunt prey for days without rest. Is that true? David nodded slowly. Humans have high endurance, yes. We can run long distances without stopping, but we use that ability for marathons now, for recreation and sport. We don't use it for hunting. We have agriculture, trade networks, synthesized food. No one needs to persistence hunt anymore. But you could, Riven pressed. If you needed to, you could track and hunt any of us. The question hung in the air. David could have lied, could have softened the truth. But everyone in this room had just heard a lecture about what humans were capable of. They deserved honesty. If I was starving and had no other options? Yes, I probably could. But that's true of survival instinct in any species. You'd do the same if you were desperate enough. David looked around the room at the frightened faces. But I'm not desperate. I'm a student. I came here to learn, to make friends, to be part of something bigger than just Earth. I don't want to hunt anyone. Administrator Hollis cleared her throat. Professor Darien, I believe we have an opportunity here. You've just delivered a lecture about humans based on historical and archaeological evidence. You have a living human in your classroom. Perhaps he could answer questions, provide first-hand perspective. Professor Darien looked uncertain, his academic curiosity warring with obvious fear. Finally, he nodded. Would you be willing to do that, David? Help us understand humans as they are now, not as they were? David looked around the lecture hall. Most students had fled. About 30 remained, pressed against the walls, fear obvious in their postures. But they had stayed. That meant something. Yes, David said. I'll answer your questions. About humans, about Earth, about anything you want to know. Just please understand, I'm not a monster. I'm just a person trying to figure out my place in this galaxy. Same as all of you. The 30 students who remained in the lecture hall slowly moved back toward their seats, though they chose positions farther from David than before. Security stayed at the exits, weapons lowered but still present. Administrator Hollis positioned herself between David and the other students, a symbolic barrier that made everyone slightly more comfortable. Professor Darien returned to his presentation platform, though his usual confident posture had been replaced with visible uncertainty. He studied David with the intensity of a xenobiologist who had just discovered his textbooks were incomplete. Perhaps we should start with simple questions, Professor Darien suggested. David, is it true that humans can run for 20 miles without stopping? David nodded, grateful for the straightforward question. Yes, though 20 miles would be a long run even for humans. Most people could probably manage 10 to 15 miles if they trained regularly. Some humans run marathons, which are 26.2 miles, as a recreational challenge. The current Earth record is just over 2 hours for that distance. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. A student from a species with 6 legs looked horrified. 2 hours of continuous running? Without rest? For recreation? Humans do it for fun, David confirmed. Running releases chemicals in our brains that make us feel good. Some humans are addicted to that feeling. They run every day. That's horrifying, someone whispered. But David noticed the speaker leaned forward with curiosity despite the fear. Riven, the Torath student, spoke up again. The professor said humans lived in environments that would kill most species. Can you explain what your planet is like? David pulled up images on his personal datapad and projected them onto the lecture hall display. Earth appeared, blue and green and beautiful from orbit. This is Earth now after 300 years of environmental restoration. Before the fracturing, human civilization had damaged many ecosystems. We've spent centuries healing them. He scrolled through images of different environments: Arctic tundra, tropical rainforests, vast deserts, mountain ranges, deep oceans. Humans live in all of these environments. We don't have biological adaptations for them. Instead, we use technology and learned behavior. Clothing, shelter, heating, and cooling systems. We engineer solutions rather than waiting for evolution. A small Mandarin student raised her hand tentatively. Is it true that humans domesticated wolves? That you took wild predators and made them serve you? David smiled, then remembered that showing teeth frightened some species and adjusted his expression. We call them dogs now. It happened thousands of years ago during early human history. Wolves and humans formed a partnership. We shared food with them. They helped us hunt and protected our settlements. Over many generations, they changed. Modern dogs are very different from wolves. Most are friendly and gentle. Humans love dogs. We treat them like family members. You enslaved another predator species, a student said accusingly. We formed a symbiotic relationship, David corrected. Dogs benefit from the partnership too. They receive food, shelter, medical care, and affection. Many dogs live better lives than wild wolves ever could. It's cooperation, not slavery. Professor Darien interjected, his academic curiosity overcoming his fear. What about human diet? My research indicated humans consume toxic substances for pleasure. David had been expecting this question. Humans have high tolerance for certain toxins, yes. Coffee contains caffeine, which is mildly toxic, but humans process it efficiently. It helps us feel alert and focused. Capsaicin, the chemical that makes peppers spicy, triggers pain receptors but doesn't actually harm us. Some humans enjoy that sensation. And yes, humans drink alcohol despite it being poisonous, because small amounts create pleasant effects. Why would you deliberately consume poison? The question came from multiple students simultaneously. Because in small doses, these substances aren't dangerous to humans. Our bodies can process them, and they add variety to our experiences. Humans value diversity in sensations, foods, and experiences. David paused. I know it sounds strange from the outside, but it's normal for us. Petra, who had been silent since fleeing from her seat earlier, spoke up from her position near the wall. Her voice was small but audible. David, why didn't you tell me you were human? We've been having meals together for 2 weeks. The hurt in her voice stung worse than the fear. Would you have eaten with me if you knew? David asked gently. Would you have talked to me in the corridors, helped me navigate campus, explained council customs? Or would you have run away like you did just now? Petra's ears drooped. She didn't answer, but her silence was answer enough. I didn't lie about being human, David continued. It's listed on my enrollment forms. I just didn't announce it because I wanted people to know me as a person first, not as a species from scary stories. Administrator Hollis spoke up. That's a reasonable approach, though perhaps we should have prepared the faculty and students better. The Council's cultural exchange program may have underestimated how much fear human history would generate. Tell us about the fracturing, Riven said, his predator's directness cutting through the awkward moment. What really happened to your species? David took a deep breath. This was the hardest part to explain, the darkest chapter of human history. 300 years ago, human civilization was at its peak. We had 12 billion people, advanced technology, and we had started exploring beyond Earth. We had also created weapons powerful enough to destroy our entire planet. Nuclear weapons, biological weapons, artificial diseases designed specifically to kill humans. The students listened in horrified silence. Humans had divided themselves into different nations and cultures. We competed for resources, territory, and influence. Tensions escalated. Wars broke out. Then someone made the decision to use weapons of mass destruction. Others retaliated. Within weeks, human civilization collapsed. Nuclear explosions destroyed cities. Plagues spread across continents. The climate changed from the massive amount of debris thrown into the atmosphere. Billions died. David's voice remained steady despite the emotional weight of what he was describing. The survivors called it the fracturing because it broke everything humans had built. Our global civilization shattered into isolated groups struggling to survive. Technology failed. Knowledge was lost. For decades, humans fought just to find food and clean water. How did you survive? Professor Darien asked, his academic interest overcoming his fear. Slowly, painfully. Small groups learned to work together again. They preserved seeds and restarted agriculture. They recovered lost technology from ruins. They remembered the mistakes that caused the fracturing and made sure future generations understood them. Over 3 centuries, we rebuilt, not back to what we were before, but into something new. David changed the display to show modern human cities, gleaming structures integrated with restored nature. renewable energy systems, clean oceans and skies. Modern Earth is different from pre-fracturing Earth. We learned that unchecked growth and competition lead to destruction. We built a global civilization based on cooperation, sustainability, and shared resources. Every child on Earth learns about the fracturing, so we never forget what happens when humans let their aggressive instincts control them. A student from a species David didn't recognize asked, "But you still have those instincts? You're still apex predators?" "Yes," David admitted. "We still have competitive drives, aggressive instincts, and predatory abilities. But humans are more than our instincts. We have consciousness, ethics, and the ability to choose our behavior. We're predators who learn to hunt problems instead of prey, to pursue knowledge instead of territory." "That sounds like propaganda," Riven said bluntly. "Predators don't just turn off their hunting instinct." "We don't turn it off," David corrected. "We redirect it. Humans still compete, but now we compete in sports, academic achievement, artistic expression. We still form fierce pack bonds, but now those packs work together across the entire planet. We still problem solve like hunters, but now we hunt solutions to challenges like disease, environmental damage, and resource scarcity." Professor Darian was making notes on his data pad, his fear gradually being replaced by scholarly interest. This represents a fascinating case study in species-level behavioral modification. The trauma of near extinction forcing evolutionary change in social structures rather than biological adaptation. "It's more than that," Administrator Hollis said thoughtfully. "It's proof that predatory species can integrate into peaceful galactic civilization. The Council has been debating human integration for months. Many factions argued that humans were too dangerous, that history would repeat itself. But if humans successfully rebuilt their civilization with cooperation instead of competition as the foundation, then maybe the scary stories aren't the whole truth," Petra finished quietly. She had moved slightly closer during David's explanation, though still maintaining distance. "Maybe we've been afraid of ghosts instead of seeing what's actually in front of us." David felt a small spark of hope. "I can't speak for all humans, but I can tell you what I want. I want to learn from other species. I want to share human knowledge and perspective. I want to be part of this amazing galactic community, not as a predator, as a person." "Show us," Riven said suddenly. "Show us what humans can actually do." "Then maybe the scary stories aren't the whole truth," Petra finished quietly. She had moved slightly closer during David's explanation, though still maintaining distance. "Maybe we've been afraid of ghosts instead of seeing what's actually in front of us." David felt a small spark of hope. "I can't speak for all humans, but I can tell you what I want. I want to learn from other species. I want to share human knowledge and perspective. I want to be part of this amazing galactic community, not as a predator, as a person." "Show us," Riven said suddenly. "Show us what humans can actually do." Riven stood from his seat in the lecture hall, his full height impressive even among the diverse species present. As a Torath, he stood nearly 7 feet tall with a muscular build and natural predatory grace. His species had been mentioned in Professor Darian's lecture as apex ambush predators, creatures that could wait motionless for days before striking with devastating speed. "You claim humans are the deadliest predator species," Riven said, his voice carrying challenge rather than hostility. "Yet you look weak. No claws, no fangs, no natural armor. You said humans compensate with tools and strategy, but I see neither. You're just small and soft." David understood what Riven was doing. The Torath student wasn't being cruel. He was being scientific. Words could be propaganda, but demonstrations revealed truth. The other students leaned forward with renewed interest, fear mixing with curiosity. Administrator Hollis stepped between them immediately. "Absolutely not. We will not have students engaging in physical confrontations regardless of the educational value." "Not a confrontation," Riven clarified. "A demonstration. The human says his species adapted to survive through strategy and endurance. I want to see proof. Let me understand what made humans so dangerous." Professor Darian looked torn between his duty to prevent student conflicts and his burning academic curiosity. "There are facilities designed for xenobiology field studies. Controlled environments where we observe species behavior safely. The training grounds," one of the security officers suggested. "We use them for emergency response exercises. They have monitoring systems, safety protocols, and medical support." David felt his heart racing but nodded slowly. "I'm willing if it helps people understand. But I want to be clear. I'm not fighting anyone. This would be a demonstration of human abilities, not combat. Administrator Hollis considered for a long moment, then made a decision that probably violated multiple regulations. Fine, but with strict conditions. Non-lethal scenarios only. Full safety monitoring. Medical teams standing by. And this is educational observation, not entertainment. 20 minutes later, the group had relocated to the Academy's xenobiology training grounds. The facility was designed to simulate different planetary environments for field research practice. Today, they had configured it as a mixed terrain area. Open grassland, scattered trees, rocky outcrops, and a small water feature. About 50 students had followed, word of the demonstration spreading rapidly through campus networks. Riven stood at one end of the course, confident and relaxed. His species had evolved for ambush predation, possessing exceptional senses and explosive speed over short distances. David stood at the opposite end, looking decidedly less impressive in his standard academy clothing. Professor Darien explained the scenario. This is a simple capture the flag exercise. Each participant has a flag attached to their back. The objective is to capture your opponent's flag without losing your own. No actual violence. Physical contact is permitted for tag-out purposes only. Safety systems will intervene if any participant is at risk of injury. Duration? Riven asked. 30 minutes maximum. You may yield at any time. David removed his jacket, leaving himself in a simple shirt and pants. He had no weapons, no special equipment. Several students muttered about how unfair this seemed, how the human would be captured within minutes. The signal activated. Riven moved immediately, his predatory instincts driving him to close distance and end this quickly. He was fast, incredibly fast, covering ground in powerful strides. David did something unexpected. He ran away. Not in panic, not in fear, but with measured efficiency. He didn't sprint at maximum speed, but maintained a steady pace that covered ground quickly without exhausting his energy reserves. Riven pursued, confident that his superior speed would close the gap within seconds. It took Riven 30 seconds to realize something was wrong. He had closed to within 10 feet of David, close enough that his next burst of speed should have ended this. But every time he accelerated for the final strike, David adjusted his path using obstacles and terrain to break line of sight, and Riven was already breathing hard. He's making him chase, Professor Darien said softly, watching the monitors that tracked both participants. Classic persistence hunting strategy. 2 minutes into the exercise, Riven was clearly frustrated. He was faster than David in straight sprints, but the human kept changing direction, using terrain features, never letting Riven close to tagging range. And Riven's powerful bursts of speed were exhausting his energy reserves, while David maintained his steady pace. 5 minutes in, Riven tried a different approach. He stopped chasing and instead positioned himself near the center of the course, using his species' natural patience. If he couldn't catch the human through speed, he would wait and ambush. David circled the area slowly, clearly aware of Riven's position but making no move to approach. Students watching through the observation windows looked confused. Why isn't the human attacking? Someone asked. Because he doesn't need to, Administrator Hollis said, understanding dawning. He just needs to outlast. 10 minutes passed. 15. Riven remained motionless, demonstrating the incredible patience his species was famous for. David kept moving, circling, never stopping. His breathing remained steady and controlled. He drank from his water bottle while jogging, something that impressed the observers. At 20 minutes, David made his move. He had been studying Riven's position, noting the Torath's slight shifts and adjustments. David grabbed a fallen branch not as a weapon but as a tool. He threw it far to Riven's left. The Torath's predatory instincts reacted to the movement, his head turning for just an instant. David used that instant to change his circling pattern, approaching from a different angle. He picked up a handful of soil and small stones. When Riven's attention focused back on him, David threw the debris toward Riven's face, not to injure but to distract. Riven blocked instinctively, and in that moment David was moving. Not toward Riven directly, but in a wide arc that took him around the Torath's position. He used his momentum and a convenient rock formation to change elevation, getting higher ground. From his elevated position, David assessed the situation with the pattern recognition Professor Darien had mentioned. Riven was tiring from maintaining full alert status for 20 minutes. The Torath's movements were becoming slightly less sharp. his reactions marginally slower. David didn't have the speed or strength to challenge Riven directly, so he didn't try. Instead, he used the terrain. He moved to position himself near the small water feature, knowing the soft ground there would slow Riven's powerful charges. He found a long branch and broke it to create a staff extending his reach. Riven recognized the strategy shift and charged, deciding that even tired, he was still faster and stronger than the human. He closed the distance rapidly, preparing to simply overpower David and take his flag. David didn't retreat this time. He planted his staff in the soft ground near the water and used it as a pivot point, swinging his body out of Riven's path at the last moment. The Torath's momentum carried him past David, his feet sliding slightly on the wet ground. David didn't chase. He reset his position and waited. Riven was breathing hard now, his energy depleted from 25 minutes of high alert status and multiple explosive movements. David's breathing had barely changed from his steady rhythm. The Torath tried twice more to close and tag David. Both times, the human used leverage, timing, and environmental advantages to avoid direct confrontation. When the 30-minute timer sounded, neither participant had captured the other's flag, but the difference in their conditions was stark. Riven stood hunched and breathing heavily, his powerful body depleted. David stood upright, still moving lightly on his feet, his breathing elevated but controlled. He could have continued for hours. "Yield," Riven said, his voice carrying respect rather than defeat. "I understand now. You didn't win through strength or speed. You won by never stopping. I gave everything trying to catch you, and you barely tried. If this had been a real hunt on your planet, I would be dead from exhaustion while you continued tracking." David approached carefully and offered his hand in the human gesture of respect. Riven studied the hand for a moment before accepting, understanding this was how humans showed acknowledgement between equals. The students who had watched erupted in discussion. Professor Darien was frantically taking notes. Administrator Hollis looked thoughtful. "Persistence predation combined with tool use and environmental manipulation," Professor Darien said, addressing the gathered students. The human didn't rely on any single advantage. He combined multiple small advantages into an overwhelming strategic position. This is what made humans dangerous. Not individual strength, but the refusal to give up combined with constant tactical adaptation. A student raised a tentacle nervously. But if humans are this dangerous, this persistent, why did the Council allow them back into galactic space? What if they decide to expand aggressively? Another student, one who had watched David carefully throughout the demonstration, answered before anyone else could. "Because we wouldn't be able to stop them anyway. If humans wanted to expand by force, we wouldn't see them coming until it was too late. They would plan, adapt, and persist until they achieved their goals." The observation created an uncomfortable silence. David spoke up, his voice carrying clearly despite his continued light breathing. "That student is right. If humans wanted conquest, you probably couldn't stop us through force. Our survival instinct is too strong, our adaptability too high. But here's what you need to understand. Humans already tried the conquest approach. We conquered our entire planet, eliminated rival predators, dominated every environment, and then we nearly destroyed ourselves." He gestured to the training ground around them. "The fracturing taught us that being the deadliest predator doesn't make you safe. It makes you alone. Modern humans chose cooperation because we learned that surviving together is better than dominating alone. We came back to the galaxy peacefully because we want to be part of something bigger than human civilization. We want to learn from you, share with you, and grow alongside you." Riven, still breathing hard but recovering, added his perspective. "I challenged the human expecting to see a killer. Instead, I saw a strategist who avoided harming me while demonstrating complete control of the situation. That shows more than physical ability. It shows choice." Professor Darien addressed the gathered students. "This demonstration reveals something crucial about the human species. They are indeed dangerous apex predators with abilities that exceed most galactic species. But they are also intelligent beings capable of restraint and cooperation. Perhaps the question isn't whether humans are dangerous, but whether we can build a civilization that includes them productively." Administrator Hollis nodded slowly. "The Council will need to see this. Not just reports and data, but real understanding of what humanity has become." 3 days passed after the demonstration at the training grounds. The Academy buzzed with discussions about humans, about David specifically. and about what the return of humanity meant for the galaxy. Student reactions split into three groups: those who remained frightened and avoided David completely, those who were cautiously curious and watched from a distance, and a small group who approached him with genuine interest. Petra belonged to the third group now. She found David in the academy library, studying xenobiology texts in a quiet corner. The library was one of the few places where students of all species mixed freely, the pursuit of knowledge temporarily overcoming fear and prejudice. "May I sit?" Petra asked, her voice uncertain. David looked up and smiled, careful not to show too many teeth. "Of course. I'd like that." She settled into the seat across from him, her large eyes studying his face as if seeing him for the first time. "I've been thinking about what you said during the lecture, about wanting people to know you as a person first. I understand now why you didn't announce your species. I'm ashamed that I ran from you." "Don't be ashamed. You were frightened. Fear is a valid response to perceived danger." David closed his textbook. "I'm just glad you came back." "The demonstration helped," Petra admitted. "Seeing you interact with Riven, seeing you choose not to harm him even when you had advantages. Actions matter more than reputation." Before David could respond, Professor Darien appeared at their table. The Velcron looked tired, as if he hadn't slept well since the lecture. "David, do you have a moment?" "I'd like to speak with you privately." They moved to one of the library's private study rooms, spaces designed for quiet discussion. Professor Darien closed the door and stood silently for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "I owe you an apology," the professor finally said. "My lecture about humans was based on incomplete information. I presented your species as extinct monsters without considering that you might still exist, might be listening, might be hurt by my words." David nodded slowly. "Your information wasn't wrong, Professor. Humans did those things. We were dangerous. We did nearly destroy ourselves. You weren't spreading lies. You were teaching history. But I taught history without context or nuance. I presented the worst of humanity without acknowledging the possibility of growth or change." Professor Darien sat down heavily. "I've been an educator for 40 years. I should have known better than to reduce any species to their most violent characteristics." "Why didn't the council brief faculty about human students?" David asked. "Administrator Hollis said the peace accords were signed 6 months ago. Surely there was time to prepare." Professor Darien's expression grew uncomfortable. "The council is divided about humanity's return. Some factions wanted to keep human enrollment quiet, to see how humans behaved in galactic institutions before announcing their presence widely. Others argued for quarantine, for keeping humans isolated in their own system. The cultural exchange program was a compromise, allowing limited human participation while most of the galaxy remained unaware. "We're an experiment," David said, understanding. "Test subjects to see if humans can integrate peacefully." "Essentially, yes. Though that's an oversimplification." Professor Darien pulled out his datapad. "Which brings me to a proposal. The Council's Xenosociology Committee has requested a formal presentation about modern humanity. Not archaeological evidence or historical records, but current information from actual humans. They've asked if you would be willing to present." David felt his heart rate increase. Speaking to a classroom of frightened students was one thing. Addressing the governing body that would decide humanity's place in the galaxy was entirely different. What would they want to know? Everything. Human culture, government, technology, intentions. They want to assess whether humanity poses a threat to galactic peace. Professor Darien's expression was serious. "I won't pretend this is without risk. Your presentation could determine whether humans are welcomed as equals or restricted to your home system." "No pressure then," David said with dark humor. "When would this presentation happen?" 2 weeks. I could help you prepare if you're willing. I may have gotten humans wrong initially, but I'm still an expert in xenobiology and interspecies communication. Together we might create something that gives the Council the understanding they need." David considered carefully. He thought about Earth, about the billions of humans who had rebuilt civilization from ashes. They had worked for 3 centuries to heal their planet and themselves. They deserved a chance to join the galactic community as equals, not as quarantined threats. "I'll do it," David said, "but I need to be honest about humanity. No propaganda, no hiding our nature. If the Council is going to make decisions about us, they need the full truth." "Agreed." though we should probably emphasize the growth and change rather than dwelling on ancient violence. Over the next 2 weeks, David worked closely with Professor Darien to develop the presentation. They crafted a narrative that acknowledged human history while demonstrating modern transformation. They gathered evidence, testimonials from other human students at galactic institutions, data on Earth's environmental restoration, footage of human cities where diverse cultures cooperated peacefully. News of the presentation spread through the academy. More students approached David with questions, some hostile but most genuinely curious. Riven became an unexpected ally, telling anyone who would listen about the demonstration and how David had shown both capability and restraint. The day of the council presentation arrived. David stood in the preparation room adjacent to the council chamber, wearing formal Earth diplomatic attire. His hands shook slightly despite his attempts at calm. Administrator Hollis appeared in the doorway. "The council is ready for you. Remember, you're not just representing yourself. You're representing all of humanity to the galaxy's governing body." "That helps my nerves tremendously," David said, attempting humor to mask his anxiety. "You'll do fine. Just be honest. Be yourself." That's what convinced the students. It will convince the council. The council chamber was circular, with representatives from 40 species seated in ascending tiers. Each seat had translation equipment and data displays. The sheer diversity of forms was overwhelming. Species that breathed different atmospheres, operated at different temperatures, perceived reality through senses humans didn't possess. David walked to the central presentation platform, feeling hundreds of eyes and equivalent sensory organs focused on him. A human would have felt exposed. David reminded himself that humans had evolved to handle being watched by predators. He could handle being watched by politicians. The council speaker, a being from a species David didn't recognize, initiated the session. "David Wright of Earth, you have been invited to address this body regarding humanity's request for full integration into Galactic Council space. Please proceed." David activated his presentation display. The first image showed Earth from orbit, beautiful and alive. "Honorable council members, I stand before you as a representative of human civilization, not to ask for mercy or special treatment, but to offer partnership and mutual understanding." He didn't shy away from difficult history. He showed images of pre-fracturing Earth, overcrowded cities, environmental damage, weapons of mass destruction. This was humanity 300 years ago. We were apex predators who conquered our entire planet. We developed technology faster than we developed wisdom to use it responsibly. The next images showed the fracturing, mushroom clouds, plague hospitals, abandoned cities. This is what happened when predatory instinct met advanced technology without sufficient restraint. We nearly destroyed ourselves. 12 billion humans reduced to 400 million in less than a decade. Murmurs rippled through the council chamber. Some representatives looked satisfied, as if this confirmed their fears about humanity. David continued. "But near extinction changed us. The survivors faced a choice: repeat the mistakes that led to the fracturing or build something new. They chose transformation." Images shifted to show the long rebuilding, small communities working together, environmental restoration projects, the gradual recovery of human civilization. Modern Earth is built on principles learned through catastrophic failure. Global cooperation instead of national competition. Sustainable resource use instead of exploitation. Integration of human communities instead of division. Every human child learns about the fracturing not as abstract history, but as personal legacy. We carry the memory of what happens when predatory instinct is not balanced with wisdom. David showed current Earth images, cities integrated with nature, clean oceans, restored forests, renewable energy systems covering former wastelands. This is humanity now, still predatory in our instincts, still competitive and persistent, but we've learned to direct those traits toward productive purposes. We compete in sports and academic achievement. We persistently pursue solutions to challenges. We hunt problems, not prey. A council member interrupted. "You claim transformation, but can predatory nature truly change? History suggests predators eventually return to violent behavior." David had expected this question. "You're right that predatory instinct doesn't disappear. But intelligence allows choice. Humans will always have the capacity for violence. That capacity kept us alive on a death world. But we also have capacity for cooperation, creativity, and compassion. The question isn't whether we have dangerous instincts. It's whether we choose to be controlled by them. He showed footage from the academy, his demonstration with Riven, his interactions with students, his peaceful participation in classes. I could have hurt Riven during our demonstration. My instincts and training would have allowed it. I chose not to because violence wasn't necessary. That choice, repeated across billions of humans over 300 years, is what defines modern humanity. Another council member spoke. What does humanity want from the galaxy? Knowledge, trade, friendship, adventure. David's voice carried conviction. Humans spent 3 centuries focused inward, healing our planet and ourselves. Now we want to look outward again. We want to learn from species that evolved differently, that solved problems in ways humans never considered. We want to share our perspectives and experiences. We want to be part of something larger than just human civilization. And if the council refuses, if we decide humanity is too dangerous to integrate, David had considered this possibility carefully. Then we would respect that decision and remain in our home system. But consider this. You can't unknow that humans exist. You can't prevent human technology from advancing. You can choose to work with us now, building relationships and understanding while humanity is still small and eager to cooperate. Or you can isolate us and hope that centuries from now, when humans have grown powerful enough that isolation is impossible, we still remember that the galaxy chose exclusion over partnership. The chamber fell silent. The council speaker considered David's words carefully. You're saying that refusing integration now creates the very danger we seek to avoid? I'm saying that cooperation builds trust while isolation builds resentment. Humans don't want to be the galaxy's feared predators. We want to be the galaxy's persistent problem solvers. The species that never gives up on challenges. The partners who bring unique perspectives to galactic civilization. But we can only become that if you let us try. The council deliberated for hours after David's presentation. He waited in an adjacent chamber, uncertain whether he had helped or hurt humanity's cause. Professor Darien stayed with him, occasionally offering reassurance but mostly sitting in companionable silence. Finally, Administrator Hollis entered with news. The council has reached a decision. They're ready to announce it. Back in the council chamber, the speaker addressed the assembly. The council has considered David Wright's presentation and supporting evidence. We find that while humanity's history justifies caution, their demonstrated transformation over 3 centuries justifies hope. Therefore, the council votes to establish formal diplomatic relations with Earth and permit full integration of human citizens into Galactic Council space and institutions. Relief flooded through David so powerfully he thought his knees might buckle. The speaker continued. However, this integration comes with requirements. Earth must maintain transparent communication about their military capabilities and expansion plans. Human students and citizens in council space will be monitored for any signs of aggressive behavior, and Earth must contribute to galactic peacekeeping efforts, using their unique capabilities to help maintain order rather than disturb it. We accept those terms, David said, speaking on behalf of humanity, though he had no official authority to do so. Someone from Earth's actual government would formalize it later, but this moment required immediate response. 4 months later, David sat in Professor Darien's classroom again. The lecture hall was full, every seat occupied. Word had spread that the professor's course on apex predators now included a human teaching assistant who provided first-hand perspective on humanity. David no longer sat in the back row. He sat at the front, helping Professor Darien present information about human biology, culture, and history. The students still looked nervous sometimes, but curiosity increasingly overcame fear. Petra attended every class, taking detailed notes. 3 new human students had enrolled at the academy, part of an expanding exchange program. They reported similar initial fear from other students, but growing acceptance as people got to know them. Professor Darien began today's lecture with a smile. Welcome to Apex Predators, Understanding and Integration. Today we'll examine how predatory species can contribute positively to peaceful civilizations. Our case study, humanity's transformation from near extinction to galactic partnership. David stood to assist with the presentation, no longer the feared monster from ancient stories, but a student, a teacher, a friend, and a bridge between humanity and the galaxy. Outside the windows, ships from 100 worlds docked at Haven 7's orbital station. Among them were 3 vessels from Earth, their presence no longer shocking but simply part of the new normal. The galaxy was learning to live with humans. Humans were learning to live with the galaxy. It wouldn't always be easy. Fear and misunderstanding wouldn't disappear overnight. But they were trying together to build something better than fear. And if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was persistence. They would keep trying, keep adapting, keep working toward integration until it succeeded. Because that's what apex predators did when they chose cooperation over conquest. They never gave up.